If you like listening to Warriors in Their Own Words, check out our other show, the Medal of Honor podcast. The link is in the show description. I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. In partnership with the Honor Project, we've brought this podcast back at a time when our nation needs these stories more than ever. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for listening, and by doing so, honoring those who have served. Today, we'll hear from Staff Sergeant Brian Keith. Keith was among the first Marines deployed to fight in the Gulf War. He served as a forward observer.
Well, I was going to college, doing the whole football gig, and I decided that, I didn't have the level of commitment or discipline, frankly, to put in the time for the academics. So I decided that I needed a big change, and I definitely got it when I joined the Marines. Frankly, I didn't know a lot about artillery or anything like that. I mean, of course, I knew big guns. But I didn't know anything about forward observation. When I went to the School of Infantry, because I signed up as an infantryman, they had selected me to be a mortarman originally. And so I went through mortar school and, learned how to be a mortarman. And then shortly thereafter, they asked me if I wanted to be a forward observer. It was interesting. I was in pretty good shape. I was kind of a tall, thin guy, had quite a bit of endurance. And one of the things that they said about forward observation is that you're going to be carrying not only all the equipment that everyone else carries, but plus a radio and batteries and, cryptological gear and all that other kind of stuff. So they have to be in, excellent condition, excellent shape and all that. So I thought, well, that sounds pretty challenging as well. I guess as far as the description that they gave me was, your responsibility is to support and protect, and I guess in a sense, defend the units that you're out supporting. It was a pretty incredible responsibility. When you think that as a young Lance Corporal, I was responsible for taking care of all these other people indirectly, so to speak. Someone had told me at some point that the life expectancy of a forward observer on the battlefield was about 30 seconds. So I didn't really think one way or the other, I guess. It just, to me, it seemed very interesting. It was, and frankly, it beat carrying a mortar around. Yeah, the majority of the time when I went out, I was with, like I said, with an infantry unit, but generally, out front. In the Gulf, I was with a forward element, the tanks, and we also had a machine gun element, a machine gun platoon, and then our universal spot team, which consisted of myself, who was a forward observer for both artillery and mortars, and also a forward air controller. And we did have a naval gunfire liaison with us as well, and then plus a driver/communicator. And as I said, mortars, primarily when I first got into it, I just did mortars, 81 millimeter mortars. Every Marine infantry battalion has an 81 millimeter mortar platoon. So I was the forward observer with a particular company. For instance, we had forward observers that went out to all the infantry companies to provide, either direct or general support of whatever unit it was that was out there. So, yeah, so I'd go out there and literally, locate the enemy, reference the map. And that was one of the things that they had mentioned to me too, in describing what forward observation was all about, is that you had to be an incredibly good land navigator. You had to be able to identify and do terrain association, because you not only need to know where you are and where friendly troops are, but you also need to know where the enemy is and need to be able to direct that fire accurately, because it doesn't take much, with a artillery piece that's firing 18 miles away, it doesn't take much in error to have it land in the wrong place. So you have to be real careful about what you do. frankly, I could land on friendly troops, which, I used to have, I remember, even prior to the Gulf or anything like that, I used to have dreams about calling in for fire. My former wife actually had said that I would call for fire in my sleep, and had dreams about, bombing my own people. And so I was just deathly afraid of that, so I did everything I could to prepare myself to frankly be the best forward observer I could be. I studied all the time. I practiced my land navigation. I stayed in excellent condition. I did everything that I could possibly do to make sure that when the time came, I was ready. We were in Panama at the time, and we got the word, hey, we're going back to the States a little bit early, but they didn't tell us why. And so when we got back to the parade deck at Camp Pendleton, they told us, you have 10 hours from now, be back here, and don't unpack any of your gear. So we knew we were going somewhere. We just weren't certain of it, but we had a pretty good indication that it would probably be to the Middle East. And we got back after our 10 hours of liberty, and boarded buses and went to 29 Palms, California, and did about a week's worth of training, getting acclimatized, I guess, to some extent, and doing a lot of shooting, a lot of live fire exercises and things like that to make sure that all of our equipment and our weapons and whatnot were working properly. And then we boarded planes and took off. I likened it to, because we had, thankfully had a number of years of peace, if you will. And it was kind of like practicing for the football game you never got to play. And, while I don't think anyone, hopes for war or anything like that, I think it's, inherent in all of us, at least we that were in the military, that, it was a test. It was to see how you did. Can I do this? And you never really know until the time comes. And one of the times that I remember the most right before we went is when we were in the hangar bay waiting to get on the plane, and a couple of our NCOs came around and with crates of ammunition and started handing out ammunition, and we started filling magazines before we got on the plane. That kind of started to lead us to believe, okay, this is for real. This is a real deal. And frankly, we didn't know what the situation on the ground was. All we knew is that we were given ammunition. So, I thought, as soon as we get off the plane, we might be in a gunfight. So, of course, we had our equipment as best we could, ready to go. But when we stepped off, of course, the airport was secure, thankfully. It was about 135 degrees on the tarmac when we stepped off. And we were in helmets and flak jackets. And, the plane was air conditioned. So for basically about 24 hours, we'd been in an air-conditioned environment. And then all of a sudden you step out into this blast furnace. And it was the most amazing heat. I mean, just wilting heat that, that one would ever feel. And a friend of mine, Todd Hansen, he was from, I think he was from Queens. He said, Keith, he said, I can't even do 6 days here, let alone 6 weeks. Because that's what they had said, we'll be here for about 6 weeks. And, he said, I'll go crazy. I'm like, well, where are you going to go? I said, not like you can run away. But, it was pretty incredible when we first got there. I mean, just never felt anything like it ever. And like I said, we'd just come from Panama, and we'd just come from, 29 Palms, the American desert. So, I thought, no problem, but just completely different, miserable. We didn't get our first mission until the very first day of the war, which I think was it 22nd of February? I think it was 22nd of February. We had moved up incrementally, really when we got there. We arrived August 12th, which was 10 days after the invasion. And so we moved up incrementally as, I guess as time progressed and, negotiations faltered and all that kind of stuff. They continued to move us closer and closer to the border. And I think it was January 17th. Is when the air campaign began. And I remember I was laying in my hole, and I had a Walkman and I could listen to the BBC. and just had announced, the air war has begun, and whoops and cries, and people kind of celebrating, I guess, finally getting started, because we'd been there at that point almost 6.5, 7 months. Training in the desert and, and sitting around and there's not a lot to do in the desert, if you can imagine that. It was a little unsettling, I guess, when we got our vehicle prepared and everything ready to go. I realized we had 7 antennas on our vehicle. Prime target. This is, it's like a pink neon sign saying, shoot us. We're, we have a lot of radios, and all that kind of stuff. Take a shot at us. What do you think? Even my time as a sniper, we trained all of our people to be able to utilize supporting arms, artillery, mortars, and, close air support, because, that it's such a valuable asset. And you can change the tide of a battle. One person can change the tide of a battle, with a well-placed fire mission or with, an accurate, airstrike or whatever. So being a forward observer has a great deal of impact on what can occur on the battlefield, because you're really shaping the battlefield for the infantry and for the ground troops and everything, prepping, a particular position prior to them going in and clearing trenches and bunkers and things like that. So, you provide them a valuable asset and some valuable support. So it's a very proactive role that you take, with being a forward observer. So, so actually we got, it was the 22nd, I think it was the 22nd of February. It was the first day of the ground campaign. We had finally moved up the night, or I guess it was the day before, into, I guess kind of our final position. And this is where things even became more real, because that's when we actually, took the anti-tank rockets out of the cases and the hand grenades and all that kind of stuff. And so, we knew there was really, we're going in for sure this time. There's no coming back, and then about, I think it was like 4:30 in the mornings when we actually started the first push. They dug a hole through the Saudi sand berm. And, I don't know, it's just this enormous berm, probably 20 feet high and 50 feet thick. And so they dug big holes through this, and that's what separated Kuwait from Saudi Arabia. Through the gap we went, and we were probably 50 yards on the other side of the berm when I had my first near-death experience. A tank, it was dark, and the tanks were all buttoned up because we had, intelligence and whatnot had said, they're Iraqis, they're there and they might be there right away. So, everybody be prepared. Well, we were driving straight and a tank was not. It was driving at an angle. And literally we stopped and the tank stopped almost at the same time within 6 inches of us, because, the tank probably wouldn't have noticed a whole lot. It would have just, kept on rolling. But, so, it's kind of an odd start to the day. We had a general direction that we would be heading. We had essentially a corridor that we would be moving up through. We had Task Force Papa Bear to our right, or which would have been our east. And then we had some of the 2nd Marine Division, I think it was 1st Battalion, 8th Marines on our left flank as we moved up through. So we had our lane of responsibility, if you will, moving right up the center, headed for Kuwait City. Actually, we never had the opportunity. We were moving so quickly and the battle progressed so fast that there really was no time to set up any kind of forward observation post. So we were doing it on the move. In our vehicle. Like I said, we had a Humvee with 4 guys. So it was a pretty busy vehicle. It actually worked well. What I did is kept track of our position. And as I told you before, we didn't have a GPS. We didn't have a global positioning system. So I had to keep track via, my compass and an odometer and, keeping track of a couple of vehicles I knew that did have GPSs and orienting myself from them. But, I guess, necessity is the mother of invention. So you just basically did dead reckoning. Once we would have an opportunity to stop, I would, check my coordinates again, make sure I knew where I was at. And then, once we would begin to move again, obviously on that direction and that distance, I knew that I was headed on that line and I knew where I was at. So that worked out, frankly, pretty well. The first mission was, it was at the first obstacle belt. And, we had been receiving some sporadic fire and stuff like that. And we pulled up there and let them have it, I guess. Let it loose. It was an infantry, I don't know, I guess a platoon position. We'd been receiving some fire from that area. And so it just called for high explosive ammunition. A lot of smoke and fire and sand and, stuff getting kicked up all over the place. It was pretty amazing. But, again, we weren't sticking around for very long. It was shoot, move, and communicate primarily was, I guess, the order of the day. We didn't have a lot of time to, I guess, to look around or do anything like that. We had our mission and we were making progress pretty quickly. It was quite a moment, I guess. And really, kind of realizing for the first time that somebody's shooting back at you, was kind of brought you to reality pretty quickly, and I guess, and one thing that I'd always been told is that you will fight the way you practice, the way you train. And it was absolutely true because there wasn't any apprehension. Certainly there was a lot of adrenaline, going on and probably some fear as well. But I got on the radio and just did it, and there wasn't a lot of thought process to it. I just knew what had to be done and I knew how to do it and I did it. So it was pretty wild. You can hear the artillery shells, but they don't whistle, like you see on the movies. You can't really describe what it almost sounds like wind, going over top of your positions or whatever. And, they make a hell of a bang when they hit because the 155s, they fire a 125-pound projectile. And that's the high explosive round. And they have a ton of an assortment of ammunition and stuff that they utilize. But, that high explosive is pretty standard ammunition. It has an effective casualty radius of 55 meters. So anything within a 55-meter range is done. And they shred everything. And I guess I should have brought it with me. I had some shrapnel, actually, that I'd picked up. And the shrapnel is probably 10 inches long and probably 1.5 inches wide and about as sharp as a knife on the edges. You could probably cut yourself with it. So imagine that thing flying around at, about the speed of sound, red hot, and just cuts through stuff like a knife through warm butter. I guess one of the things that that I still to this day remember very vividly is all the oil and the smell that was that just permeated everything, throughout the entire battle and throughout the entire conflict. There's a smell associated when human flesh is burnt. And it's a smell that you can't describe, but it's not a good smell. It was really wild to think when I was in the Gulf. I mean, I was a corporal at that time, and I had an entire regiment of artillery in direct support of us and the breach that we were doing. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of firepower for, one little guy like me to have at my disposal. And it's pretty wild to think about, how much power you can actually wield with a radio.
I'm Allison Holland, host of the Kennedy Dynasty podcast. Equipped with a microphone and a long-term fascination of the Kennedy family, I am joined by an incredible cast of experts, friends, and guests to take you on a fun, relaxed, yet informative journey through history and pop culture. From book references to fashion to philanthropy to our modern expectations of the presidency itself, you'll see that there is so much more to Kennedy than just JFK or conspiracy theories. Join me for the Kennedy Dynasty podcast.
The Battle of Waterloo was one of the most famous turning points in world history. But what happened next? My name's David Montgomery, and I'm the host of The Siècle, a history podcast that tackles exactly that. Join me as I cover France's overlooked century in between Napoleon and World War I. The Siècle, spelled S-I-E-C-L-E, is part of the Evergreen Podcast Network and can be found wherever you get podcasts.
I looked around, I did my battle damage assessment. I thought, okay, I got pretty good impact on target. All right, now time to move on, something else. So there wasn't a lot of time to ponder. It was, okay, now what's the next threat? What's the next thing? Trying to, all the time, I guess, be cognizant of what was going on. Situational awareness, I guess, probably the best way to describe it. There were a lot of craters, and actually their positions were not very well made, not very well dug. They weren't reinforced positions at all. It was just sand. I mean, it was just basically, I guess trenches dug in the sand, and they'd been pounded on so long, I think, they'd stopped making improvements to their positions. So in some places, of course, the sand had filled it in. So, there were it didn't offer a lot of protection for those people. One of the interesting things is, when we would pull up to a position like that, and, start the barrage, it didn't take for very long for those people to give up. There wasn't a lot of fight, I don't think, left in them in a lot of cases. I mean, on a number of occasions, of course, they came after us pretty hard, but, the most amazing thing I saw over there really was when we were driving across the desert, and literally as far as the eye could see from horizon to horizon was nothing but armored vehicles, tanks, and infantry vehicles. I mean, literally as far as the eye could see. And, of course we had, fixed wing aircraft that were buzzing around all the time. We had a lot of rotary wing aircraft, Cobra helicopters and so forth. That were, providing us with support. As a matter of fact, at one point we had just stopped, and I was taking a look at some targets, I think, and a Cobra fired a Hellfire missile right over the top of our vehicle. So I hear this big bam. And, and your initial reaction is to get on the ground, but I was in a vehicle, so there was nothing I could do. And I had no idea what it was. I thought, surely a tank was shooting at us or something like that. But it was actually a Cobra helicopter that fired right over the top of us. But that'll send pins and needles up your spine, There were actually tanks that were dug in, and our tankers did a really good job of taking care of those threats, I guess, if you will. I remember there were some tanks that had their turrets completely blown off, and were obviously sitting there burning. And yeah, there were 15, 20 bodies laying about. It was that brings you pretty close to reality pretty quickly. I guess the level of destruction that can be brought to bear, with not really a great deal of effort at all, just with basically getting on the radio and making a call. When we would pull up to a position, we'd engage targets, for instance, troops or tanks or vehicles or whatever the case might have been at the time. It didn't take very long for them to surrender, and in droves. And sometimes we, would approach positions and we didn't even have to fire a single bullet, because, they would come out in droves. They would get out and anything that they could find that was white, they had in their hands and were showing very readily, of course, to everyone, that, hey, I'm giving up. No, don't shoot me. But I mean, there were just too many of them. There were too many to even handle. So, it got to the point where we finally just started, pointing to the south, and let them go. I mean, we had to let the rear units, the units that were following us up, kind of coordinate the prisoner effort, I guess. I think they were not only were they beaten militarily, but I think they were beaten mentally. And, once someone's lost their will to fight, they're not going to hang out and get shot. Well, it was 4 days total. So it was really a pretty short operation, I guess, comparatively speaking. I think the first night we stopped and dug in, and actually, I think it was, if I remember right, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was pitch black. I mean, it was so dark I couldn't see with my night vision goggles on because of all of the smoke from all of the oil fires and everything that had been detonated and were burning. And it was it was pitch black. And that gives you kind of an odd feeling when you know that there are enemy tanks out there running around, enemy units out there running around, and you can't see. That's a little unsettling. So the first thing I did when we stopped and set up position was dig a fighting hole. Wanted to make sure that I was prepared. Yeah, I was out with the tank unit. We had a tank company that was assigned to us, and then also we had a machine gun platoon. And then I was up there in the midst of all of these guys, which was kind of funny because here are these tanks, they're big, heavy, protected vehicles, and lots of firepower and everything. And then you've got these machine gun vehicles, which are, Kevlar, have Kevlar, I guess, Kevlar outsides, Kevlar shell. And we were in a Humvee that was a softback. It was canvas, on the sides. So, there we are up there doing our job, where everybody else is pretty well protected, with canvas doors on, on the vehicle. So I remember distinctly coming into Kuwait City. It was at night, and we'd received some sporadic fire, but again, at night, it's difficult to be able to tell exactly where everybody is as far as a unit, as units are concerned. So, I was very careful about, calling in for fire or anything like that. And I remember at one point, when we came up to the interstate right on the edge of Kuwait City, one of the tanks, opened up with a 50 caliber machine gun, and the red tracers. And then, some of the machine gun unit, some of the machine gun platoon had opened up as well. And I remember watching this whole exchange happen and thinking to myself, wow, the tracers are really pretty. I remember thinking that to myself, wow, that's, it's pretty, but, you understood that, there's combat going on, not, 15, 20 yards from where you're located at. It's pretty incredible stuff. We were on the west flank of the battalion, and they had told us that a counterattack was imminent. That there was an armored company or battalion or something like that was forming a counterattack. And so I was placed out on the flank with our people, with everybody else in our vehicle. And, and in the distance, probably, 5 miles away, we could see a great deal of like a cloud of sand, So, what's going through my mind is, here they come. Here comes a battalion of tanks. And, and the adrenaline starts, pumping real hard and everything like that. And so what we did is we punched out even further towards, in the direction of where the origin, I guess, of the cloud. And so we could get a better point of observation. And what it ended up being, as I got my binoculars out and started observing and started watching, what it ended up being was a unit, an American unit, coming back our way to join back up with the main body. And so, you know, wow, talk about relief. Talk about relief. Well, the first thing that you do is you determine the target's location. You absolutely have to do that. I mean, obviously, identify what the target is. Obviously, identify that it is foe, and you identify the location of the target, and then you have to think about, based on what the target is, think about what sort of ammunition you need to use in order to engage that particular target. For instance, high explosive ammunition with a quick fuse, you would use for troops in the open. A time delayed fuse is something that you would use on troops, who were dug in. You have aerial burst rounds and all that kind of stuff. So you have to look and see what it is, determine, the best remedy, I guess I'll call it, if you will. And then you put all that together. And I wrote everything down because I made sure that I didn't make a mistake. It was very important to me. And so I wrote down, obviously the target location, what I saw. And also these, everything that I send in is essentially what we used to call a salute report, which is a report about the enemy: size, activity, location, unit, time, and equipment. So when you send in a target description, when you're calling your fire mission, essentially you're giving the headquarters intelligence as to what's out there and the location, in addition to, of course, addressing the target or attacking the target. So yeah, just depending on whatever kind of targets we were trying to engage, would determine on what sort of rounds I would necessarily request to engage them with. We had a laser rangefinder, and it was a handheld laser rangefinder. And what you would do is, you would laser the target. Obviously, laser bounces back and gives you a distance to the target. Within a meter of accuracy. So because in the desert it's very difficult to tell how far things are away because it's so flat. I mean, literally over a 2-mile area, you might only have an elevation increase of 5 meters or something like that. So, things seem as though they're farther away. So the, laser rangefinder came in, it came in really handy. Yeah, we definitely bracket the target. You get your initial impact, and optimally, make your adjustment and fire for effect off of that. And, depending on what the situation was and what the targets were that we were engaging, would depend on how quickly we would engage, whether or not we would try and bracket the target or not. And, optimally, you want to get first round effect. When that first round comes down, if you have effect on target, automatically go into the fire for effect phase. It was rewarding because I guess, I was able to be a part of something. I was able to be a part of a historical event. And even though that event was, was pretty tenuous and a little and downright scary sometimes, very proud of what I did and was able to do. And I guess serving my country.
That was Staff Sergeant Brian Keith. Thanks for listening to Warriors in Their Own Words. If you have any feedback, please email the team at kharbaugh@evergreenpodcasts.com. We're always looking to improve the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review. Warriors in Their Own Words is a production of Evergreen Podcasts in partnership with the Honor Project. Our producer is Declan Roars. Bridget Coyne is our production director, and Sean Rule-Hoffman is our audio engineer. Special thanks to Evergreen executive producers Joan Andrews, Michael DeAloya, and David Moss. I'm Ken Harbaugh, and this is Warriors in Their Own Words.
I'm Allison Holland, host of the Kennedy Dynasty podcast. Equipped with a microphone and a long-term fascination of the Kennedy family, I am joined by an incredible cast of experts, friends, and guests to take you on a fun, relaxed, yet informative journey through history and pop culture. From book references to fashion to philanthropy to our modern expectations of the presidency itself, you'll see that there is so much more to Kennedy than just JFK or conspiracy theories. Join me for the Kennedy Dynasty podcast.